Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Cross season is over. Last week we were discussing Oosmale, but you don't need to wait long for us. And this time of the year we still managed to keep up quite well making podcast episodes. With me here today is Issam. I hope the Ramadan is going well for you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's going rather well. So yeah, I'm managing, and thank you for having me.
Recording after hours so your throat doesn't get too dry when we're talking, and the road season got underway with the Omloop het Nieuwsblad and Kuurne Brussels Kuurne. Well, it was already underway for some time, but the Belgian Classics got underway today, and Mathieu van der Poel, he took the win in the Omloop het Nieuwsblad. I think we can be very, very brief about it. We saw some footage from training, and it's always very, very dangerous to go off of that, but regardless of the expectations that those training videos created, he would always have been the big favorite for the Omloop het Nieuwsblad, and he didn't seem to have too many difficulties winning that race. The start list, compared to what we'll see at the Tour of Flanders, in all honesty, also wasn't really that strong, but he had one moment of trouble. That was when Rick Pluimers crashed in front of him on the Molenberg, and with a really great save, he managed to avoid that, and from there on, solo on Muren van Gerardsbergen, and went on to take the win.
Yeah, and the way he does it the best, we've seen it now a couple of years now. It is this almost vintage Van der Poel, and he's in good form. He seems to be in good form, and the question will now be, how will he be able to maintain this form? Will he be able to be at his best come the biggest goals in the Spring Classics, Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, and that will be for him, I think, the target, and will be interesting to follow. But yeah, with the starting field that there at the Omloop, it was definitely challenging, but if he had a good form, and we saw it, the form was good, then he is definitely going to be racing there as the favorite, and he showed that role was definitely the one that should have been appointed to him, and made it all happen.
Then the main topic of today's episode, that is the Olympic bid for cyclocross. The sport has been trying to get onto the Olympics for decades, the Winter Olympics to be specific. And today we want to create a little bit more context about that. Maybe brief and summary, here is kind of what we've already discussed. We've both gone over numerous times what this would mean for the sport. It would mean quite a lot. A lot of federations are already preparing for that. They think that the Olympic National Committee funding to cyclocross will increase. They think that more sponsors and teams will be interested in the sport, and they therefore think that cyclocross will be able to grow as a sport. And that is mainly coming from outside the Netherlands and Belgium. I spoke this winter with numerous, maybe a dozen national team coaches, be it from Japan, Canada, Hungary, Slovakia, Sweden, and even if I'm not the one bringing it up, the Olympics, they quickly steer the conversation in that direction, because that's the main thing on their mind. They're already preparing. They're thinking, hey, if we get this money, what can we do with it? How can I show that I'm worth of the money? So that's what they are thinking themselves. It would mean quite a lot for the sport, and there's a lot of critical, or not a lot, there's more critical voices in Belgium and the Netherlands, where I think many people don't necessarily see the struggles that cyclocross has outside of the heartland, and that's all fair, right? Like, if you're in Belgium, you read the Belgian newspapers, and they obviously report mainly on the Belgian teams. You will get to know a lot about Pauwelsau's, the Balois, the Roodhoofd teams. Really, really great reporting, don't get me wrong, but if you're not necessarily trying to venture into the niche, hey, how's it going with the AS bikes, or what is Guerciotti up about, and even if you go even deeper, then you can really see the struggles of the teams and the riders there. So we both think that the more international perspective is what will happen with cyclocross. We've both also maintained the stance, Issam, that we think that, okay, if it has to be on snow, so be it. We both don't think it's really representative for the sport what it is, but if it has to happen, then we would both be relatively okay with it, because we see the good it could do and value that higher than the bad, namely a not fully representative race.
Yes, I think that when that would be the case, I think that then the calendar should adapt more, these races in a way, and should try to put more races on the calendar, so it's not like this real surprise result in a sense, that the riders really can get more familiar with that surface in a race atmosphere. And I think that would definitely be beneficial for how that race could play out, and also for the professional approach the athletes can have. But I totally agree that it should not, if it has to be done on the snow, obviously not going to be something that we see throughout the winter. But if that is what it takes to be Olympic in a sense, I don't think that is a requirement that we should do to be too difficult about. I think that it is. We have seen it in Val di Sole. It was a bit atypical for sure, but it was still a race that was enjoyable. The scenery was amazing, and the racing was tricky but fun to watch. And I think that it was very noticeable as well. The shots that were made in those races were beautiful as well. So I think it's definitely a good thing. It will add something to the sport as well if that would be the case. So yeah, I definitely not opposing something like that.
One interesting thing to consider here, which I previously neglected to do, it was pointed out by one of our listeners and readers, was what you said, right? Like, if the sport does become a Winter Olympic sport on snow, then there could be a shift in where the races are held, and we could see more winter sport resorts, if you want, like these Nordic centers where they have ski jumping and cross-country skiing, biathlon venues which already host a number of mountain bike races. We could see more of those places host cyclocross with real or fake snow. But part of the reason why we're recording this episode is because that's not a given. A lot of the discussion around cyclocross at the Olympics has been narrowed down to a binary decision. Cyclocross will be added yes or no, kind of based on if the UCI can convince them and if the IOC feels like it. But there are a number of actual hurdles that need to be crossed for cyclocross to become an Olympic sport, and they are laid out in the Olympic Charter. So the first one is more of a bureaucratic one, and cyclocross easily clears it. You need to be governed by a federation that adheres to the WADA code. So the UCI is recognized by the IOC, and the WADA code is respected because cyclocross is the same in the eyes of the IOC as the other cyclocross, or the other cycling disciplines. I mean, the UCI sanctions many of them, so that's no problem. That's only a thing maybe for really niche sports that are kind of trying to establish their foothold, and then it takes something to get recognized by the IOC. But if we look further, the main problem with the rules and in the charter has been the infamous article about snow and ice. 6.2, only those sports which are practiced on snow or ice are considered as winter sports. So cyclocross can be practiced on snow and ice, but it is not consistently done so. So it becomes a bit of a grey area here. Does it qualify under this? And so far the IOC has maintained the stance no. However, this rule is something that's on the chopping block. The new IOC president, Chris Coventry, she's been trying, and in her campaign also, to change the narrative about the Winter Olympics. Because why is this rule there? It limits the Winter Olympics commercially. It gets a bit of recognition and recognizability through all the events that are there, but maybe you could shed some light on why that rule is currently on the chopping block.
For a part, it has to do with our beautiful climate. I think that for sure it has an influence on why they are reconsidering it. If you look at the environment, it's just also very difficult to find a place where all these things are being able to be facilitated. And I think also for what also plays a role is the fact that because we have all these sports that are being done in the snow and ice, it is tricky for certain countries to get in, especially if you look at the African continent. For them it's they are a bit offside at this point. They don't really have the disciplines. They really have to get out of their comfort zone in a sense and really pursue something to be able to participate in the Winter Olympics, and the IOC is seeing that. They are looking into it and trying to make sure that they are more adaptable, and that they're more open-minded, that they're able to allow sports that are a bit more like cyclocross into the Olympic Games, and that they would bring a new countries in a sense that would be able to participate, or have athletes from their country represent them in the Olympic Games. And I think that is all part of how the world is changing. Climate change obviously plays a role in that, and I think those are just things that we are getting more and more aware of how our environment is working out. And I think that those are definitely things where, factors that they are looking at, and those are the things that, in my opinion, the cyclocross as a sport will benefit from also in the future.
So you have climate change, and then the second point you make is about the number of countries participating at the Winter Olympics, and I think that immediately ties into the third point, which is the value. So the whole overhaul of the Winter Olympics comes, I think, from a main difficulty in recent years. It's been increasingly difficult to find cities willing to host the Winter Olympics. The Winter Olympics here to Milan Cortina, they were awarded, I believe it was the only bid. The 2030 Olympics to France, they were only awarded in Paris. That's 6 years before the event takes place. That's really late. Normally it's 10 or 12 years in advance. Salt Lake 2034 only came to the forefront as the only candidate. They were the only ones bidding. And then for 38, they're going to Switzerland, which is, okay, there's talks about a new bid from Vancouver, potentially, or Calgary, but really, there's not that much interest. And that's mainly down to costs. It's quite expensive to host any Olympics. And where at the Summer Olympics, there's quite a lot of return, not just from the magnitude of the events, what's coming in. It's relatively easy to, in modern day, repurpose your venues. Like the skateboard park, it goes up and it comes down again. You can put down a temporary BMX track. You're not really stuck with the cost of infrastructure, and that's been a real problem at the Winter Olympics. Now with speed skating, there's a little bit of a realignment. Okay, there's a possibility for a temporary speed skating venue, but still, the bobsled track in Milan Cortina was 130 million euros at least. I don't know where half of the budget went even. A ski jump, it's expensive. You can't really take it down. Okay, with big air, we're removing to something that is possible to take down, but you're still stuck with a bunch of expensive infrastructure that you can't really repurpose. And that's why it's difficult to find these hosts. And without a host, there's of course no Olympics. Climate change is also playing a role in that because it's more expensive to put down the fake snow. There's fewer places where you can even operate on fake snow. There's even fewer places where you can have actual snow. I think one report said that between 2040 and 2050 there would be only 5 places left in the world where you could host the Winter Olympics and have a guarantee of real snow. So you can see how the options of the IOC are shrinking, and that they think change is necessary. And with that, they've done a number of things, and I promise we'll come to cyclocross in a little bit, but this is just necessary to establish kind of the baseline on why the opportunity for cyclocross to be included is increasing now, because the push is not new. Cyclocross has been trying to get in for 30 or 40 years. But now it could differ because of these things, and you're seeing first, all winter sports have been audited. Currently on the elimination list, Nordic combined and the parallel giant slalom, but there was a recent article after the Winter Olympics by Duncan McKay. He is a well-respected sports journalist, and he said that the plans of the IOC to make the Winter Olympics fit for the future go far above and beyond what was previously suggested. They say that they might do away with all sliding sports because they're too niche. They're only really popular in Germany, Austria, too small markets. It's super expensive. It's a real struggle to find places to put on those events at the Winter Olympics, and that instead they're looking at a whole new model for the Winter Olympics in which they want to move event from the Summer Olympics to the Winter Olympics, because the Summer Olympics are running into constraints where it's too many sports to put on for a host committee, so that they're considering handball, volleyball, potentially basketball, pretty much any indoor sport. Judo was also mentioned in there to be moved to the Winter Olympics. Personally, Issam, I think that this is currently maybe just something that's on the table and they're looking at everything together, but for that to really happen, I think it would take a long time, because it requires a complete overhaul of the way that the Winter Olympics are organized. Now you can see, okay, there's maybe one town like Milan or in 2030 Nice to host it, but you're still somewhat close to the mountains, right? And these towns very often don't necessarily all of a sudden have the capability to, besides have all the snow sport and ice sport venues, also have all these arenas available for all the indoor sports.
Obviously, you're also, you're risking losing the magic where what the Olympics is all about in a sense, when you really are going to spread the events over, maybe even multiple countries at one point. So it is a bit risky, and I think that they will definitely try to gradually try some things out and see how it is going, and adapt, and if there are any changes that have to be made, then they will try to make that. So they will be somewhat experimental with that, and I don't know how fast it will go and if they really will pursue all that, but it is something that they are taking into consideration, and that alone is showing that there is this new perspective in a sense about what the Winter Olympics has to be all about, and what it has to involve with in terms of athletes are being able to take part in during the Winter Olympics. And that is obviously, that standard seems to be changing and shifting into a certain direction, and I think that if you look at that and you look at the progress that will be made there over the years, I think that cyclocross fits okay in that regard, in that trajectory, and is definitely a sport that is capable of helping out, in a sense, the Olympic Committee in pursuing what they want to see being changed in the next coming years.
One of the advantages cyclocross really has is that it's super cheap to put on. Almost any host region can find a place to host the sport, especially if it doesn't have to be on snow or ice, because you can just put it in any city, really. I mean, Benidorm is showing that. Put it in downtown Nice, find a park or parking lot in Salt Lake City. Maybe you put down a few hills, maybe you put down a sand pit, but it doesn't need to be too crazy. And what also helps is that it's tied into, and this is really a genius thing, it's tied into the bid of the cross-country running. And I always shit on the UCI, and I think there's plenty of reasons to do so, but this has really been a genius move by presenting these kind of as a 2-for-1 bid, because they can share the same venue. You're looking at, with cross-country running, really a new market of countries. I mean, that sport is also dominated, but dominated by countries that are not currently at the Winter Olympics, definitely not with strong representation. The countries dominating are Uganda, Kenya, Eritrea. So that's a genius move, because with that they add another really strong point to it, and that doesn't really necessarily go to cyclocross. I mean, cyclocross and cross-country running both have domination problems, but I think it's not as much about domination, but it's about the interest you can bring, and the interest that cross-country running can bring from countries in a continent that currently don't really have any pathway to the Winter Olympics is quite considerable.
Ethiopia is not going to be happy with you. They would have liked to be mentioned there as one of those countries. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that from both governing bodies, it was a master move in a sense to present it as a 2-1 bid, and I think that that was part of the success formula. It still has to be official in a sense, but I think that it is all going to work out, and I think that it is going to be great in a sense. For sure, people will look at that Some will look at that and be like, yeah, it has no role in the Winter Olympics in a sense. But I think that that is always going to be the critique that you will have when you try to introduce something new, something that is not really in line with what traditionally the Winter Olympics was all about. But I think that with time it will have its place, but it has to, it has to be given time, it has to develop. And I think on both disciplines have in the past and can in the future produce surprises. I don't think that it is gonna be a 100% guarantee that we will have those events being held, and that it is going to be one of those dominating countries winning it. I mean, it could very well be the case, but there is always this element of surprise, and I think that that will be no different in a sense.
And that brings us to the point of internationalization, because why does it matter how many countries there are? Well, the IOC mandates and enforces a strict athlete quota for any Olympics, be it the Summer or the Winter Olympics. They have hard capped this, and sure, we can argue as sport fans, well, they should increase it, but this has honestly surprised me, but the main problem for it is the Olympic Village and the housing. You would think, especially in Europe where there's many housing shortages, that it's easy to repurpose something like that for housing, but it turns out that with the way that it's designed and the super specific needs for Olympic housing, often the Olympic Village is quite difficult to repurpose and sell, and not really what normal people want when they are looking for an apartment or a studio or a complex. So it's an interesting problem, and we can want that to change. And look, maybe because now, and this has done a lot for finding more hosts, the ability to host a Olympic across multiple cities or regions or even a country, and even have an event in another country. Like, we can say, okay, maybe this will allow for a little bit more relaxed rules and maybe some things will change, but you're still looking at an athlete quota cap. So that means that if 30 or 60 cyclocross riders in total get added to the Winter Olympics, that means that in other sports 60 riders or athletes need to disappear. And there is a possibility that that happens, right? So, like I said, Nordic Combined, their head is currently being inspected. That sport is undergoing supervision, they are being monitored, and if they don't meet the criteria, they can lose their Olympic status as a whole. Well, that all of a sudden frees up 50 or 40 places. Super giant parallel slalom on the snowboard, I think that's another 60 athlete places coming up. So that's 100. So that could be 25 cyclocross men, 25 cyclocross women, 25 cross country men, and 25 cross country women. I'm just hypothetically speaking what that means. But for that to happen, you're kind of looking at a trade-off here, right, Issam? So if cyclocross comes on, it must add more value than whatever is going away. And a new sport can add value, and it doesn't need to be as black and white. Like Nordic Combined can stay, but maybe they scrape away with 5 athlete quota over there. Hey, biathlon, you have this many people. Or cross-country skiing, yeah, we don't really like how many Norwegians and Swedes are at the front, so we're going to enforce like the same as in speed skating, maybe 4 max per country. In speed skating, they already cut down a number of years ago to allow for new sports to come in. This Winter Olympics, ski mountaineering was there. Anyway, what I just want to say is there is some leverage in there, but you're looking at a value trade-off, and in such a value trade-off, it's important to look at, hey, how popular is this sport? How many viewers could it bring in? Does it bring in new viewers to the sport as opposed, or to the event with the sport coming in, as opposed to what we already have? Can we break into new markets? So I think that's why it matters to look at how international cyclocross is, because in the old charter there was a very clear outline. It said, well, it needs to be practiced on this many continents and in this many countries, and cyclocross of course meets that, but there's more to it than that. It can be competed there, but the IOC is not very friendly towards sports that are super dominated by a handful of countries.
We can be honest about our sport in a sense that it is, we we would have loved that at this point of the sports development, in a sense, it would have been more international. and there would have been more international representation at the top as well. And I think that some progress being made, but obviously it's, if you're very critical of it, you could argue that it is not at a point where you would want it to be before joining or becoming an Olympic discipline. I think that is, at least for me, that is how I look at it, and there is some work that has to be done. But then again, if you look at the opportunities that being admitted to the Olympic Games will bring for certain federations, I think that then obviously that is a factor that has to be played in, and the pathway to a more international sport, to a sport that will have more interest over the continent, that will eventually play a role as well in having riders at the top, in the top 10, in the top 20, that is more diverse in terms of countries, and that is not only dominated by two countries. But are the Netherlands and Belgium going to lose the status that they are currently having? I don't think so, because they have the perfect infrastructure for it. The races are, they have, so especially in Belgium, the amount of races that are being organized and held is immense. If you want to become a better cyclocross rider, you cannot lie to yourself and you have to go to Belgium. You cannot be like, oh no, I don't need to stay here, in a sense. It is the place to be if you want to become a better cyclocross rider. Also in your staff, you have to try and, have that experience. It doesn't need to be someone from Belgium per se, but it has to be someone with experience. And then you will be looking at somewhat more the traditional countries that have been involved with cyclocross for quite some time. It's just that experience, it's hard to find elsewhere, in a sense. So I think that is a position that will always kind of stick around, at least for the next coming years. It's going to be a guessing game in terms of what being admitted to the Olympic Games will mean for cyclocross in the future. But I think that I tend to lean more towards a positive perspective, in which I think that it would benefit quite a bit, and that it would eventually make the sport more international, and we will see kind of what we are already seeing with certain countries, that will just get better and better, and that we maybe see even more countries at least have an attempt of trying to develop talent that will eventually reach the very top of cyclocross.
Well, I agree with you, Issam, that the Olympic potential for cyclocross is quite high, and this is what we started with, right? Like, so many national coaches have said, if we just had more money, if we just had more infrastructure, look what we could do. And we'll get to that more towards the end of the podcast, but if you just look at the way it is right now, yeah, it's not that good. I mean, I crunched the numbers, and in the elite category, I think it's 11 or 12 countries that have ever won a medal at the Cyclocross World Championships, and that's just not a lot. And for the research we published on our Substack, we took a sample from Olympic years, and we came to 10 medaling countries ever in the history of cyclocross, and only Luge with 7 does worse than that. But it's not really a good way to look at it, the all-time high, because the all-time is, as it says, all-time, but cyclocross needs to be, well, kind of evaluated, audited in its current way. The same way that the Olympics are auditing all their winter sports in the now. Like, how much viewership do they have? How much dominance is there? And with that, in the modern era, cyclocross also, unsurprisingly, does not do that good. Since 2006, and this is using a sample, there are 8 countries that have made the podium of an elite cyclocross world championship, and on the men's side, I think we're down to 4: Czech Republic, Great Britain, Netherlands, and Belgium. Like, the last one, I think before that, was Franzoy in Hooglede Gids and Page. Those two, those were on the podium there, and we had Mouret before, but it's not been that international, unfortunately, on the men's side. And the women's side has done a lot of carrying in those years, but is now Persico is the only one since 2020, since the Dubendorf World Championships, the only non-Dutch rider to score a medal. So I guess what my frustration has been, Issam, is that there's been a lot of cherry picking and comparing based on apples and oranges, and that's why I really wanted to just take a look in the numbers and in the modern landscape. I mean, if you look how many countries have medaled in cyclocross, we are at the bottom compared to the Olympic sports. We're at the same level as Nordic combined, which is being kicked out potentially. We're just above luge. If you look, another factor to look at it is how many countries medal per event, and then cyclocross is also at the bottom. Only Nordic combined does worse. If you look at domination by top 2 country medal share, yeah, cyclocross again only falls short of luge. So it's not really looking that good, but you can also look at it at an event level, because cyclocross, as opposed to events like luge, only has 2 medal events. I mean, I think the relay should become Olympic, but it's a little bit hard to see that happen because they all have these quota, right? Like, and when a new sport comes in, why is the mountain bike Olympic? Why don't they have a relay there? Well, because there's only 8 countries that can field 2 riders, and those are not the same on the men's and the women's side. So then you come down to a relay with 1 man and 1 woman, and even for that, there's not that many countries that you could get with the way that the quota work, and how at the Olympics a lot of these quota are universality places where 1 men rider maybe from Rwanda gets appointed, like in Tokyo, but then the woman that gets appointed for Africa is from Namibia, and you can't really field a team that way. So if you narrow it down to the event level, just each event, men and women, then cyclocross does much better. It's kind of in the middle of the pack. It's still not special compared to the rest. It's, like I said, in the middle, but it's far better than, for instance, luge doubles or Nordic combined. But those only have they don't have women events. They only have had men events until this Olympics. So they're kind of in a cluster with some other sports significantly better than the ones that are unpaired. And sure, it's a reason that advocates for cyclocross. The parity between men and women has improved a lot compared to sports that don't even have those events. But still, how good of a sign is it when we compare like cyclocross as a sport to the Winter Olympics, and we come to the conclusion, well, we're not the worst, but the sports that are the worst are the ones that are at risk of being completely cut off the Olympics. Nordic combined and all the sliding sports, which when we wrote this article, nothing was yet known, but they are apparently also at risk despite having confirmation until 2034 or even 2038. Like, they too are at risk because they're not appealing enough. Like, what does that really tell us about the state of cyclocross?
that we have to be very thankful that we might be admitted to the Olympic Games in a sense, and that there was an argument for it not to, not being admitted in a sense. We have to be honest. But we feel, at least the ones that are advocating for the sport to be admitted to the Olympic Games, feel that there is a untouched potential that might come out when it is admitted. And that is always tricky because you're talking about something that we don't really know if it's really going to happen. It's a bit like the World Cup calendar and Flanders Classics, and the way we hoped for change, and it is there, but it is not really there, and it's like years of waiting and frustration and all that. So it's like, in a sense, I'm hoping that is not going to be the case, but we have to be, the numbers don't lie, and the numbers are not really in favor if you're talking about that argument. And if that argument would have been made by the IOC, it was something that we could not argue against. You could bring other points to light in a way. If you look at the potential, the amount of countries that are participating at the World Championships and all that, then you could look at that and see the benefits of it in a sense, and the potential. But it is all kind of hypothetical in a way. And if you just look at the facts don't lie, and the facts are not amazing, and it's relevant to this discussion overall. And I think that is understandable because it's like, we feel that this sport, if it really wants to become a bigger sport, if it really wants to be more professional, if it really wants to touch that potential that we see, it has to become Olympic. And that is that next big step that it kind of was missing. And hopefully, it seems to be all heading the right direction. So that is definitely all the positives. But we have to be honest. In many ways, cyclocross is ready for the Olympic Games, but in this regard, it's not really ready yet.
Yeah, and I think that it would be a little bit silly to exclude cyclocross based on a lack of international competition, because I get
Mm-hmm.
how it works, right? Like the status quo bias means that it's harder to take something away, so it becomes near enough impossible to add something because it's so hard to take something away. That's been a sport, a legacy, and if you now need to audit a sport like, hey, Nordic Combined wants to become Olympic, yeah, then that wouldn't have happened if they had placed a bid for 2014 because they didn't have a women's sport at all. But they are in there, and because of that, they kind of go on their legacy and their reputation, and the status quo bias means that they are ensured of their place. And even now, it's really difficult for them to kind of do away with the sport for good when critically looking at it. If they're held to the same bar of accountability as cyclocross, they should have been axed off the Olympics for a long time. So I get how that is, but cyclocross doesn't do worse than the worst sport. So I then don't think that it's really fair to say, well, you're not international enough, because I think you should hold all sports to the same bar and the same measure of accountability. And with that, yes, cyclocross has its problems. And yes, even if you look at the top 10 level, it is not that diverse. Like, you're still looking at one of the worst performing sports in the total number of nations that get a top 10 and the number of nations that get a top 10 per Olympic year. It's not that good. But I think it can become a lot better, and that is, I think, what should be the core of the cyclocross bid. It shouldn't be, hey, look how international we are, or hey, look how good we are. The core of the cyclocross bid should be, we will become more Olympic when you, or more international when you make us Olympic. And the countries that can practice cyclocross at the Olympics are countries that currently don't all have a good path to the Winter Olympics. And sure, cross-country running is a lot more accessible than cyclocross. But cyclocross, you can practice it anywhere in the world. And that is something that doesn't go for skiing, biathlon. Like, those sports, they are geography bound. But you live in Mexico and you want to pick up a cyclocross bike and make your way to the Olympics, it becomes a lot easier than if you want to do it in other sports. And the level of training that you can get just on physique and on training, if you put together a good program, is so much different in cyclocross than for cross-country skiing. I mean, I know there was a cross-country skier from Mexico and she walked dogs to fund her Olympic dream, and it's a fantastic story that she makes it to the Olympic, and that's the Olympic spirit. But at the same time, also, like, for her, she is the best cross-country skier of Mexico, but she can never really get much better because to train, she can't do that there. She can't train her technique. She doesn't really have that ability. But for cross, anybody like that could do it, and that goes for many countries. And the Winter Olympics are exclusive. They are a very much a rich country game. But cyclocross, I'm not by any means saying it's cheap, but it is relatively cheap also for national federations to invest in compared to other sports. If you look at how much money countries pour into freestyle sports because that's something that they can train in a place that doesn't get much snow, yeah, you don't need to put 2 million into cyclocross to have a good program. With 500,000, you're probably already running a very good high-level program. So you get what I'm saying. I think this should be at the core of the bid. Look what we can do for your event. Look what we can do. Look what will happen to our sport. And then I haven't even mentioned the forced internationalization. What will happen if they imply a strict quota?
When we were looking at the World Cup, it's obviously a bit different the way it is right now with the entry list and the riders that are able to start for a certain country. That will obviously be different when it's, with the Olympic rules, and that will make the racing maybe a little bit different. It will cause for some trouble in certain countries, and it will allow riders that normally would not look at a top 10. It will now give them more perspective of that top 10 and the Olympic diploma in a sense. So those are things that make the event overall, I guess in a sense, more significant, but also a bit different compared to what we are currently seeing at World Championships overall. So that is obviously something that you look at and be like, okay, we should not look at the Olympic Games as like just another World Championships or something, just event of that caliber. It needs to be something that is looked at and regarded as something a bit higher than that. And I think everyone will do that because it just has this name. The Olympic Games. It just has this. I guess it has some gravitas, if you really want to use that word. It holds something. It's huge. It's huge. So it's definitely something that when we will reach that date and we will reach the event's time to behold, I think that will obviously, the amount of riders that will be the starting. Some riders will look at it and be like, okay, I really want to be good there. So then they will also try to plan a peak for that race in particular instead of, the season maybe overall. And, we have seen that in how people are planning their season during a Olympic year in mountain bike, and that you just see that at the beginning of the World Cup, they are nowhere, and you're like, oh, that's not really a good place to start. And then overall they get, better and better. And there you go. When the Olympics arrive, they're there. So I think that those are just going to be things that we will see. And I think that it will be, in a sense, also for certain riders, it will be more experimental because it is something that, never has been done. So it will obviously be a different vibe for these riders to try and get yourself informed for such an event, and also just to make sure how your preparation will be, what will the surface be, how will you be trying to approach it, how will you look at your season overall, will you try to make the best out of your season and just take the Olympics as if you're even being selected for it. I think that there are definitely some things that will obviously already, without the sport evolving itself, there are just certain criterias and quotas that will already help the discipline at the Olympic Games to be a bit more international, to be, better represented overall in the top 10 and the top 20 from different countries, various countries. And those are definitely going to be things that will help maybe the racing and the sport in a sense. It's just, in a way, it's just like, are those changes really something that will be sustained in the sport itself, or is it just because you're doing it at the Olympics that you look at it and it's a bit, it feels like it's a fabricated top 10. It's like, yeah, if you take away all those Belgium or now Dutch riders, then of course you're going to have such a top 10. And it has to feel organic in a sense. It has to feel natural, because I think that will also just help with the experience overall of the viewers. And hopefully that will be the case. But that is definitely something that we will only really find out the day after the race, to be honest, when we can discuss that and look back at what the results were and how the racing was and how the season overall was as well in that Olympic year. Because it will be interesting how the athletes will plan their season in a way as well.
Well, the World Championships will be overshadowed. I mean, the Olympics will be the biggest event of the year, and the 2030 Olympics might be the biggest race ever in cyclocross. Cycles need to be added for fundamental change to the permanent Olympic program. It cannot just be added in 2030, then nothing will really change other than that it's a one-time nice thing. But I can tell you, Issam, in 2030, like those World Championships in Namur, which are supposed to be a big party, they will feel a bit strange if it's a week or 2 weeks before the Olympics, because I don't even rule out that there's athletes that will be, well, I'm going to skip the World Championships, especially on an atypical course like Namur. I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but I don't at all rule that out from happening. And it brings us to a different picture and question, right? Like, down the line, cyclocross will kind of need to carve out a identity for itself, one that's not just prone on, oh, we do the best to accommodate for road riders. It really needs to put a foot down. We are cyclocross. We are here for full-timers and part-timers. We are here as a sport. This is what we stand for. This is what we show to the world that we are. And yeah, maybe that requires some changes. I mean, there's many sports where in Olympic years there's no World Championships. There's no World Championships biathlon this year. No World Championship speed skating. There are winter sports where there are World Championships. The World Championship short track are going to be in Montreal in a few weeks from now. But look, what I mean to say is that you kind of need to figure out a place for yourself and figure out how that works. But that in 2030 could be an interesting dynamic with the World Championships 1 or 2 weeks before the Olympics.
I bet you what, that's gonna be interesting, and that's gonna be a storyline which we will hear a lot of talks about it when we get closer and closer to the year. It will obviously spark some debate. There will be some riders that are not going to like it in a way. There will be some controversy with who are going to be the riders that are going to be selected. Maybe it's gonna be, I think, a great storyline overall, and I think that at least the people that are going to cover the sport will not be, cannot complain in the slightest. And I think that the coverage overall will also a bit bigger, because I think that now, when the sport will become Olympic, it will definitely be picked up by more mainstream sport coverage in a sense, because people are going to get more interested. This is a new sport that's being admitted. What is it actually? I will try to watch it. I think that this is a unique opportunity as well for athletes and teams to try and make the most out of it. I would almost say it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, especially if you're from a generation that after that, will maybe only like race a season or two. This is it. This is your chance in a way to make the most out of it. And I think that the sport also just needs to make sure that they are ready when come 2030, that they just have a coverage that is up to date, that the standard is a bit higher, that we have a World Cup calendar that is an actual World Cup calendar. I think that those are just things that, some of the work has been done right now. When it will be admitted, that will be huge for the sport. But then it's just only half of the job has been done. Then it's up for the UCI, to Flanders Classics, to make sure that the sport is going to be ready come 2030 for the Olympic Games. And we know that in terms of, if we're talking about the internationalization, that is going to be, in terms of results, that's going to be hard to do. That is not something that is really in the hands of the UCI and Flanders Classics. That is more in the hands of the federations and the fundings and all that. But I think that if you look at the races, the coverage, the broadcasting, that those are things that, both Flanders Classics and UCI can do a lot for, and there is a lot of room for improvement. And I think they know it as well. I think that they know it and they're capable of making those changes, but it's just, it didn't really have the priority. And hopefully now when it becomes Olympic, maybe that priority will grow and they will feel the urge to really work on the package overall.
There are certainly things that can improve, but again, if I benchmark cyclocross broadcast to the Olympics, like, how long have we had the drone in cyclocross? Quite long, and it's given us quite some nice footage, especially at those World Championships in Hogerheide, where it kind of made its debut at the biggest stage. And here in many of the winter sports, the drone cam kind of came in at the Winter Olympics for the first time because of a host broadcast decision and not of these sports themselves. And for instance, in bobsled, it really did something good. But those broadcasts, we criticized cyclocross broadcasts for being the same forever, but bobsled broadcasts have literally been the same for the last 50 years. It's just these static cams. But imagine what you could do on a bobsled or a skeleton if you have like a camera in the front of such a sled and you can actually see how fast stuff is going down, or experiment with these Formula 1 cameras inside the helmet of somebody going down, and you can really see how fast they send it down there. And because it's a closed track, it should be relatively easy to do through a continuous Wi-Fi network spanning across the track. So cyclocross, yes, things can improve, and we should always strive for the improvement in the broadcast, and we should look at, hey, how can we utilize graphics more? And what I like to see, for instance, in the Omloop Nieuwsblad was that they put a split on top of the climb, and that it was on screen. And I hope they also do that in the Tour of Flanders, because, like, how nice is it that on top of the Koppenberg you can just see who's coming through in the group, and you're not always looking and trying to see the bib numbers and, oh, did this guy come back, or did this rider that we saw crash earlier, is she at the front of the race again, or is she still in the caravan? Like, it's not perfect, because you're still prone to riders being on spare bikes without a transponder. We saw that, I think, with Vermeers even yesterday, but it's still something, and it's a sign, it's an attempt to improve something, and that I will never fault. So I really like that, and we can see more of that. So cyclocross definitely is somewhere. But you mentioned something about sparking debate, Issam, but imagine what would spark debate: the selection in Belgium. Like, what if they throw a mountain bike quota? 2 Belgians. Who do you take? Van Aert, Nijs, Verstringen? Who do you take on the Dutch woman's side? Alvarado, Pietersen? Or what about Brandt? What are we going to do here?
You're just gonna do nothing. You're just gonna hope. You just have to hope that there is some, a miracle that you have two riders that just stand out a little bit more, and that the decision is, a bit easier to make. But I think that is going to be a hell of a decision. I think that is the drama that will come out of that. I feel is going to be great. Not for the riders that will miss out on it, because I can definitely understand that will be, because as I said, they're gonna be riders that it's literally going to be their once in a lifetime opportunity, because maybe after that they will only have like 1 or 2 seasons left in them, and that's a dramatic storyline overall. It's gonna be interesting how the decisions will be made, and also what it eventually will be in terms of quotas. Will we go with 2 riders, or will it be maybe 4? It could very well be that they maybe are looking into 4, but we don't really know.
One more thing that I think plays in the advantage of cyclocross is that it has a commercial independent footprint. Like, I want to warn for the idea that becoming Olympic will make every cyclocross rider like rich or able to get a living out of the sport, because even at the Winter Olympics there are medalists that are doing other jobs beside it to support them. I mean, in figure skating, a lot of the athletes are young. Some of them are working on typical college jobs to fund their Olympic dreams. We have people in curling who are medaling, but are also working in bowling centers or in coffee shops. In skeleton and all sliding sports, there are a large number of athletes that work or are dependent on private sponsors that are just funding out of the goodwill. Not private sponsor in the sense of, hey, I have this business, please promote it. More, hey, I have a rich friend who doesn't really care if he puts away 150,000 euros to me or pays it to the tax companies or whatever. Like that type of private sponsorship. And I think cyclocross, yes, our commercial footprint as a sport is very much limited to Belgium. The Netherlands, in the south, it has a foothold, but not remotely close to what it is in Belgium. There are a few other places where it is doable for riders, and we are in a unique position where, because of the overlap, the crossing between mountain bike, road, and cyclocross, there are riders that are supported for other disciplines and are allowed to receive support in cyclocross. But with that, even the fact that it's just one country where the commercial footprint is really big and a couple of others where it's somewhat smaller, you're still doing better than other sports. Like, take for instance speed skating long track. The only place where there is a commercial footprint is the Netherlands, and for the rest, athletes are on their own and they're supported because of the national federation and the Olympic money that they get. In Belgium, there's also the Olympic money, but then you just get a contract for work from the sports company of the government, and you're paid 3,000 euros a month. And don't get me wrong, 3,000 euros a month in Belgium is a perfectly reasonable salary to live from, but it's also not something that will make you rich. That doesn't have to be the essence of sport, but it is one thing I would like to warn for, but at the same time kind of illustrate that the sport of cyclocross has found a kind of niche for itself without Olympic money, which is quite unique for winter sports, where almost every winter sport, the season is done with national teams. Biathlon, national teams only. We have speed skating, national teams only, and then in the Netherlands there's a few tournaments for your trade team. Short track, national team only. Figure skating, national team only. You get where I'm going. There's very few sports at the Winter Olympics that would see riders race for trade teams throughout the season and then race for the federation at the Olympics.
Would you think that it could become a structure? I mean, we have seen it in the past where certain riders are being helped out by a federation for a race or two. But do you think that maybe because of this switch in the sense that it's going to be that there are going to be countries that will look into supporting the riders as a in a federation, and that they are solely riding for the federation during the cyclocross period? Do you think that that is something you see happening for certain countries or not?
I'm not sure if it would be for the entire season, Issam, but I think you could be maybe looking more at a structure where hopefully the World Cup also becomes more international, that you could see like, hey, we're forming a national elite team now as well because we want to exercise more control over these riders. So we're going to see how we can do that. But I'm thinking like, hey, how would this work, right? Because what are the first countries that come to mind? Like Italy and France, they have quite good elite programs now as well. But they also have teams, right? Like AS Bike Team does a really good job. They work together with FDG on the road. You have Gressiotti in Italy. They have the Ale Colnago team. So there are teams there that I'm not sure would fully give up that immediately. But what you could maybe see is countries like, I don't know, Slovakia or the Czech Republic that don't yet have such a cornerstone for themselves, such a home for those riders to really have a full program. I think you could see it a little bit there, but it would be interesting to follow. What do you think?
We have seen this sort of development in which riders, they have like this sort of small campaign in which they are supported by the federation. I think I've seen it in the junior categories in the under 23 where they are racing in the national kits. I wouldn't mind that we are going back to World Cups where we see more the national kits back in a sense. I don't think it's I wouldn't see that as a bad development in a way. So it's gonna be interesting. I think that the teams that are already there are, in my opinion, established enough that they will keep the position that they have currently. But I think that maybe for countries that are ambitious and want to set something up, I feel that for them this could very well be the solution towards at least the beginning phase of their program, to be like, okay, we want to try and support riders that are coming through the ranks from the juniors to the elites, and then maybe they want to make sure that they are not going to fall in this gap where they are not able to maybe find a team, and then they eventually go off to a road team or whatever. And even if they go to a road team, that they have the support for maybe even an entirety of the season from the federation. I think that is, I personally think that could definitely be something that could be pursued, but it's in a sense also hard to judge, because as you said, we have seen it, but we have not seen it to that extent. So that will be that will be interesting, I guess, in a way, and that will be one of those developments that if it would happen, could definitely be accredited to the fact that it is that the sport has been admitted to the Olympic Games.
You could also see a more hybrid model where national federations manage to commercialize the sport, so they bring together a national team, but they do have a big title sponsor for the team. I don't know, Carrefour becomes the title sponsor of the French national team, and the jersey of the French national team has Carrefour on it, and they add extra funding to what they already receive from the Olympic Committee. I think the final point to make here before we wrap this one up is that the Danish national coach Joachim Parbo at the World Championships made a very interesting point to me. He said the Olympic money from mountain biking was removed in Denmark, and that should be an eye-opener to all countries, that just because we see that these Olympic committees have a lot of money, it's too easy to assume that they're just going to open their checkbook and say, hey, here's €1 million for your program. He is of the impression that you need to prove that you are worth of it through good developmental vision, through documents that outline your vision, through all of that. And I think that is a very true point, because like I said earlier, some of the money, cyclocross is relatively cheap compared to other sports, especially if you look at it. And maybe that's another point we can go over still, is which countries you think would come first in terms of like, hey, where do we see the investments coming? What countries are we looking at? What totally new countries could we see in the sport? But I do think that it's true that you need to prove your worth, and you need to showcase, like, yeah, why not put that money into another sport, one that already exists? Why not put 500,000 euros extra to this sport? And again, you come back to that status quo bias, right? Like, if cyclocross is a new sport and there's not really anything going away for your country, then you need to fund this, but that money also needs to come from somewhere else. So there needs to be another team or another sports program that the National Olympic Committee has less faith in than the cyclocross coach. So you need to prove, hey, we want this money, we want to get €1 million or want to get 500,000, but why? Why us? Why not bobsled? Why not freestyle skiing? Why not ski jumping?
Yeah, that's gonna be the lobbying and the bureaucracy that will take place, obviously, and that will be a almost infinite discussion overall, back and forth, if we are worth the money and we are not worth the investment, and we have to reallocate the money in a sense to another sport that is maybe going to be more, that has more potential, and that is, we might be, in the way we have been talking about it, in a sense we have been portraying it maybe as a just a a flow of money that will come through the sport when it's all said and done and it becomes Olympic. But that's that's obviously not the case. But it could it could open it up to certain opportunities that were normally not going to be presenting themselves to teams and athletes overall and federations. So I think that is maybe a better way to look at it. But of course, the bureaucracy and the discussions about how much it will be, the funding, and what the funding really will mean, and if it actually will get those fundings, those are obviously things that it's, for one, is hard to judge how it will all play out, and two, I think it will also be very it will be very, very, very difficult to see how every country will handle it, because every country will obviously handle it a little bit differently, and will have their own priorities overall.
And then it's on that other question I posed, where do you see it going? Like, which countries do you think will kind of ascend? Because we assume that this will level the playing field a little bit. What are you kind of looking at in terms of countries?
Firstly, I feel that, the countries that already are on the rise, I think that for them it will help them even more. So, like, if we look at, for example, Italy, the Czech Republic, France, I think that those are countries that already have those structures kind of in place. And it's for them not going to be, they know where the funding has to go in a sense. So I think that if they would just get, that little bit more, and also in a sense also the security that it will give, there is also just this thing overall for Olympic athletes that there are financial structures in place in certain countries, so that will also benefit them. So I feel that in that regard, you can definitely look at it and be like, okay, there is, for those countries, it will, it could very well be that next step in their line of progress. But I think that there are definitely other countries that have been developing, but it is, I think now of Slovakia, for example, Spain obviously as well. You see that there is some youth coming through there as well, and you see that the, if you can call it that way, the Felipe Orts effect has been there, the Benidorm effect has been there. It's been, Spain historically has been a country where cyclocross has played a role. But you could see now that there is also, through the junior ranks, there is just more representation. It's getting better and better, a bit wider as well. Those are going to be the countries that they would just need that, maybe that little push. And I think it's going to be hard to think that, maybe Hungary as well is also maybe a country that they have some athletes there that could help them as well in development, and maybe also like financially. They will then put maybe more money into it, because it's for the Olympic Games, it will bring some perspective into good results. So I feel that is maybe how I look at it. Great Britain, I haven't mentioned it, but I think that it should definitely be mentioned. And I think other than that, it's hard to judge where it will go, because like a country like like Poland, for example. What will they do? Overall, I think several countries there in on the eastern side of Europe. How will that go? And then I didn't even talk about the North American countries, the United States, Canada. How will that really? We have known that for the United States, that if it becomes an Olympic discipline, I feel like the funding will be there more seriously, and maybe the approach as well will be. I wouldn't say more seriously, because I think the approach overall already is serious, but I think it will just add that little bit more of professionalism, and it will be maybe even more streamlined, in a sense that it will that they that the goal will be even brighter, in a sense, and there is a bigger goal to work towards. And I think that we've seen it in the past as well, that especially in a country like the United States, Olympic Games is really something. And I think that when that status is reached, then I think maybe that could help it out. But then if you look at road cycling, it did something, but it didn't do much. So it's a difficult thing overall, and it's hard to judge what it eventually will really do. And it's only time will tell. And I think in 2 years' time we will know a little bit more. I feel like I think in 2 years' time that we will be able to really follow a little bit the progress that has been made overall for by certain countries. And I think then you can also maybe see countries that where we did not really expect it from. You really see then those initiatives, and those initiatives in the beginning have to be in the junior categories, and then later on that will all develop into the senior categories, and it will not be successful in the first try. It will take a couple of tries before that eventually will get better and better. And for some it might take, because they already had that potential, it might take 5 to 10 years, and for others it might even take 15, 20 years. So it's it is difficult to predict where it will be heading. One thing I would say I wouldn't say almost with certainty, but I think like with 70% is for sure that the countries that already have this sort of structure ready and are already making use of it, I feel that those countries will benefit the most from this Olympic status, in my opinion.
Yes. So what I'm looking at is first the countries that already have like that slowly but surely rebuilding that elite program. So Italy, France, those are kind of the main ones. You also mentioned Spain. Then you're going to see the first effect in the countries that already run a cyclocross program but kind of see the talent drain. Their talent moves elsewhere. So in that category, borderline is also still Spain. But you could maybe argue, okay, the UK belongs there. I think definitely that the UK, to me, falls kind of... It depends on which like axis you look at it. But another axis than the program is like... to look, which I think will be important, is how much success do you already have at the Winter Olympics. And for the UK, the last Winter Olympics were really successful, but they also spent a literal ton of money on that. Like, that curling team operates on like £2 million a year. The skeleton and luge team, no, it's just a skeleton team actually, it operates on 1.6 million a year. Like, that's a lot of money. So I think in the UK, the amount of money that would go to cyclocross is a lot. UK is a rich country. They don't really have a winter sport history and culture. So with that, they are always looking at, hey, where can we win medals? And they don't have a skeleton track, but they just train the start, and then they do a couple of training camps where they can practice a number of runs. And in that category, I would also say Australia, New Zealand. Look, I know these countries have snow, but I was surprised to learn that the snow resorts that they have there are not ranked that highly, and that it's quite hard to train there. They have some talented alpine skiers there, but it's more of a place where I could see maybe them looking, hey, this cyclocross sport is something that we can do. And in Europe, I think it's also interesting because you could see, for instance, a country like Germany. They're looking, hey, where can we do it? Germany is an interesting country because they're active in a lot of winter sports, but their medal success comes a lot from sliding. But in other places, yeah, it's not been as amazing in recent years. Especially biathlon this year was not that good. The cross-country skiing program has kind of fallen back a bit. So that's just one thing to think about. Like Germany, it could happen because they're looking, hey, how can we stay relevant, especially if the sliding sports would get chopped. But a country like Norway, I don't really see much incentive for them from an Olympic Committee perspective to start doing that. It's not a country that has really much juniors in cyclocross. They don't really have a cyclocross program even anymore. They don't have that incentive to look at, hey, this 2 medals that we can get there is really worth investing in. We're at the top. It's maybe better to see how we can take away 5 biathlon medals from France. So for that, it would be interesting to see how do these countries evaluate that. I definitely think there will be some more talent coming from everywhere because there's just the appeal of the Olympics, which you mentioned earlier, Issam, but the exact nature of it will need to be determined over the years, and I don't rule out that if you're looking at a long-run addition to the program, you could see a number of totally new countries enter the cyclocross scene. I mean, Latin America, South America, I think there is a lot of potential for cycling there. It is incredibly popular. There are a lot of good road cyclists coming from there. There are more and more mountain bikers coming from that region, and I think that will only get more and more as the scouting networks expand there, as the scenes professionalize there, as they get more support, as those countries get richer. That should help, and that could spill over to cyclocross. I personally think that if you host a cyclocross World Cup there, you're going to see absolutely unreal scenes in Chile or in Brazil or Colombia. So it's an interesting path to take, and also interesting in that regard. Maybe a bit of a long shot, but I wouldn't necessarily rule out that then also South Africa at some point starts building a cross team. And these are really long-term projects, and that won't happen overnight, let alone that they will ever become a medal contender, because there's so much historical offset to overcome. But I do think, and maybe that's a little bit of the bias coming through, but I do think that if it becomes Olympic, sky is the limit for cyclocross, because it ties in to the what happens with the Winter Olympics, because if sports like handball and judo, if they get moved to the Winter Olympics, then cyclocross kind of loses its unique feature of, it's practicable everywhere, because then those countries can think, well, we want some representation at the Winter Olympics, let's go for handball or volleyball. It's a lot harder to put together a team sport, but still, it becomes a lot different. But if that doesn't happen, then I do think cyclocross has a very unique position on the calendar and of sports and the program, and it could really bring in some more interest. And of course, cross-country running, I think, will also have that effect, maybe even more. But cyclocross, I do also think, has quite a lot of potential then.
I can only agree.
That's perfect, because then I think with that, Issam, we can end this long yap session from us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I hope the listeners will get through it. But it was it's a topic that is, it was somewhat relevant with the Olympics games, ended like 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks, I think. So I think it was good that we went over it, and there have been some people that shed their lights on it, and we have we have done the same thing in a sense, but with our own takes, and hopefully the listeners found it beneficial in a way, and it was my pleasure to give my my 2 cents about it.
Thank you. Bit of a technical talk, but I hope it was interesting enough, and we will be back at some point, not really sure when yet, but we'll keep covering some of the storylines, some transfers coming up. We still need to review the World Cup schedule, but we're waiting for that to be confirmed round to come out, because that's quite important in the overall assessment of the World Cup. So we'll do that when everything is there. Thanks everyone for listening. We really appreciate the support. Really nice comments on the final race of the season that we covered in Oostmalle. Thanks everyone. Catch you guys soon. Goodbye.